This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started if you guys are ready. Okay. Oh, one other person is arriving. Let's make sure they get audio, then we'll start. Okay. All right, so we'll start with the interface. We'll start in the left menu and kind of show you how everything is organized. The global dashboard, there's basically a few levels in the portal, and then there's a lot of objects in the portal. The levels in the portal will be the global dash, or the dashboard, the global level, and then the company level itself. So when we go down to a company level, the menu is going to change a little bit. Like for example, right now, I see every device in the portal. But when I go down to a company, it's going to filter out all the objects that are not associated with this company. So we go to devices, we see a different number, the sorted amount. So those are the two main levels in the portal, and then there's also the individual object level, where you'd open an individual object and start looking at that. So those are the three basic levels in the portal. And then for the most part, the other ways it is structured is by objects and relating objects to one another in groups. So anyway, we'll move on to the admin settings and we'll go through this. The first section, recovery and purge, this is essentially a recycle bin for the portal. Anything that is deleted in a device's config listing, contact listing, will not actually be deleted until an admin purges it out. So each of these sections is relating to a different type of object in the portal. They all function essentially the same way, but we'll look at accounts, for example. We have the delete button and we have the recover button on the individuals, and you also have the delete all button here, so you can completely purge the listing if needed. That is essentially the entire recovery and purge section. So that's a quick one to cover. Groups and types. This is where we start to customize the portal a bit. I like to use device types as a good example because that applies to everybody and it's pretty easy to work with. So when we look at my device types in this particular portal, you'll see I have a wide variety of them. This is where I would modify, add, and delete different types that I want in the portal. You'll have some that come with your portal to start, but of course you can modify them if you don't like the way they're set up or you want to add some more. They won't show up in the left listing until they actually are populated in the portal. So for example, if I were to delete this one autoloader that's in the portal, I would not see the word autoloaders in the menu with a 0 next to it. It would just hide it. So that's just kind of the logic in the way that works. So going back to device types, when we look at this device listing, you'll see that once you have a lot of devices in the portal, it can get a little bit disorganized in this way that they all are devices, but I've got air conditioners, firewalls, and iPads all in the same grouping. So that's not ideal, but they all are devices. So the way we can get around that is working with classes. So going back to admin settings under groups and types, we'll go back to device types. Then we'll go to class. And so I'm going to add a class called network devices. And we'll save and close. So now I've got this class. And now I would come over here and I'd start moving firewalls, routers, switches, etc. to that class. But for this case, we'll just do firewalls just for an example. So I edit this firewall type and I use the class drop down to change to network devices. So now if I come up here and I kind of refresh the menu, I now have a separate grouping for network devices. They will no longer, the firewalls will no longer show up under devices. So this is very useful in breaking these things up. I've seen one client, he had it set up where he had his network devices, network infrastructure in one. He had another class for virtual machines. He had another class for physical machines. He had another class for workstation, something of that nature. So you can do a lot with classes, and these same classes apply to accounts, agreements, contacts, configurations, devices, documents, um, and not knowledge base articles, I don't think. Yeah, knowledge base is just by categories. They do not have classes. Don't think. Let me check real quick. Oh, no, KBs do have classes, so you can do that with KBs as well. Okay, so that's the essentials of groups and types. Um, there are some others like defining company groups, for example. This is an interesting one. So if we look at, go to the global dashboard and we click companies. Okay, so the first option we have is to view every company in the portal. The second option we have and the third option, these are company types. So when you add a company in the portal, you're going to define which company type it is. Okay, so when it's once you've done that and added some clients, you'll see that, you know, by default it's selecting client. So we've got 22 that are of the type client, and we've got 4 that are of the type vendors. And so these are customizable. The different types are customizable under this section. But I wanted to show you company groups because that's a slightly different one, and it's a useful function. Once we get below vendors, you notice there's no enumeration on these. These are company groups. So you can have groups of companies, and you can have the same company in multiple groups. So a good use case scenario for this might be if you have tiers of service, like level tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 clients, um, problem clients, um, or clients assigned to a particular engineer or a particular department at a company. Um, and the way these work are very simple. From the groups and types menu to company groups, you would do options drop down, add company group, name it, and select the companies you want, save and close. And then you have a listing over here. So that's a useful little one there. Okay, let's look at security. The authentication section, this is where you would set up Active Directory or SAML authentication, which is something you guys can do with Enterprise. We have KB articles on how to set up Active Directory or SAML through a number of outlets. I believe we have through Google, through Duo, and I think another one. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can do that to increase your security. Disable IT portal. This basically puts the portal in maintenance mode for all non-admins. For administrators, it's basically business as usual. They can look at any documentation they need to and move around as necessary. Global ACLs. This is the access control settings on the global level. We also have access controls on the company level. So for example, I'll pull up this company and I'll go to edit and I'll display all tabs to show the advanced tabs, and I'll see security. And this is where I can set permissions for individual users or security groups. We recommend security groups because users can come and go, but group roles typically stay the same. What you can do with the at the company level is you can kind of do a lock everything down and then start allowing people to view it. That's kind of a common approach, is to basically say, okay, this company's locked down. We're going to let this group, and maybe this user that's not part of a group to access this company. And on a case-by-case basis, you add more users that you want to allow. But by default, you block them. That's a decent way to go about basic company level ACLs. And then you can go down to device level and go to a device, edit the device, display all tabs to go to the advanced, and then we'll look at security. again, these are more settings that you can do to get really granular with your security: explicit denial of delete, explicit denial of edit, and general access permissions. And again, like the company level, you can block all users not specified. So very useful in that you can just, or I'm sorry, block this one, block all users not specified above. Company users are slightly different, and I'll get to that momentarily. But blocking all users not specified above would go with that same theme of locking everything down and then unlocking it to users that you want to make these accessible to. Okay, so with the global ACLs and the company ACLs and the local ACLs, you can end up creating conflicts, and it can be confusing at times if you're trying to figure out, okay, I set up the ACLs the way I think I wanted them, but I can't access with this user. This test access tool we added will help with that. So you could say, all right, my network engineer group cannot access at Acme Company, they cannot access this particular config object. Tell me why, and get access. And it will show you the ACLs and how they are affecting this particular object in the portal as compared to this particular security group. So it really helps with troubleshooting when you're creating ACLs to make sure that they work properly. Okay. So yeah, that is a useful tool when you're working with ACLs. I'd like to mention at this point the KB at kb.siportal.com. You can see we have a good set of articles about ACLs, including a video that you can watch that will kind of go into more detail of what I just described. IP access. This is an interesting feature that we have where it allows you to block specific ranges of IPs or allow specific ranges of IPs and use that as your access table to get to the portal. By default, once it is enabled, nobody will be able to log in at all unless they're coming from an allowed IP range. However, we have some options here that you can allow them to enter their multi-factor code to access. So if you wanted to go with, say, Google Authenticator, if you wanted to use that as a multi-factor authenticator for your users, you could say that, okay, this is the list, this is the denied list, it's enabled, but if you're coming from outside the accepted range, we're going to force you to authenticate with Google Authenticator. So that is something you can do with this. Okay, so log section, fairly straightforward. It's basically the same function, just focusing on a few different types of logs. So if we go to user access as an example, by default, all of these fields are going to be pretty much wide open, so it's not going to filter too much of anything. And by default, it'll just be 1 day's worth of logs. I'm going to set it back a little further and then run the report so we can see what one might look like. So we see at the top, we see a username, we see date, time, IP address, and the objects that they're accessing in the portal. Okay. So that is the logs section in brief. Password policies. This allows you to set some specific policies in regards to passwords. For the most part, I would say that the default settings that you're going to get are fine, but I would suggest later on coming back and looking to see if there's anything you want to add or change. You know, like maximum password age, you may be a little bit more strict than that and want to reset passwords a little more often. And you may want to apply a password policy to portal object passwords as far as length and special characters, uppercase, lowercase, etc. One thing in particular I like in this section is this feature: display username and password and accounts and device list. This allows something that makes it a lot easier to get to your passwords. I'm just going to pull this device listing up, and you see if they have a stored credential on a device, you'll see a little user where you can click to copy and a little key where you can click to copy the password. Before that, you know, when we didn't have that, you would need to click the individual object to get down here to copy. So we removed some clicks. That way you can get to those passwords a little quicker. Um, Portal export. This is an important tool for just in case you get a network down situation or and just disaster recovery in general, just having a redundant backup. We go to features on the website to Portal export. Now, the way the export works is it is a PowerShell script that will back up and sync your your information from the portal. If we go to the knowledge base and look at portal export, and we go to portal export here, this will tell you the entire process of how it gets started. Basically, we send you a zip file that I'll send you guys after the call. And what it does is you run the script. You go through the prompts where it's going to build up your settings file. You authenticate. This section is to approve the export itself, and then you specify a path. It's going to extract all your data. It takes a while the first time if you have a lot of data, but once it's been done once and you create a scheduled task on a machine to update this export, it's only going to check for the changes since the last sync. So if you only change 5 items in that day and you have it set to change once to re-export once a day, it will take less than a minute to update your sync. So definitely worth the time to set it up in the event of a network down situation where you're unable to access your data. Also, because it's going to be in plain HTML, we strongly advise that you use BitLocker to encrypt the volume because the passwords will be in plain text and not encrypted. Okay, the users section. I will reference the KB again here. There is a good article. Just type adding users. And this one here, adding a user to the IT portal. This gets into the very deep and detailed of what I'm about to show you, but just letting you know it's here because this section's a little bit detailed. Excuse me one second. Okay, so we have a few different types of users. The first common one you're going to have is an admin user. By default, they have access to basically everything. The other types of users are going to be a standard user. We'll look at one of these to give an idea. When you're creating a user, they have to have an email address. They have to have basically they have to have a contact stored in the portal. So it's often a good idea to have your company stored as maybe a company in the portal, so you can create your inside users as contacts and then link them to create a user in here. So here you create the username, password, etc. You have a toggle for force password change at next login. This clears out the existing password if you're using SAML or AD authentication. The access tab here, this is where you define the levels of access and which sections you want to allow. The main things to look at in here would be portal documentation. This gives, it's very literal, it is the documentation itself. If that is checked off, they will not be able to see any real data in the portal. Add, edit, and delete, those are fairly self-explanatory. The desktop app is something that we really don't support too much anymore, and it was basically just for editing documents, but we have something coming soon that should make that completely obsolete. All passwords, by toggling this on, this will allow standard users to open a device and open the password and move on from there if the ACLs allow them to get to the device. However, if it's turned off, it's going to request that the admins approve the request. So usually all passwords is a common one to have toggled on, and you just use the password access logs to view who's looking at what. But again, that's an option, and it's just something you want to consider when setting up your individual users and such. Password admin, this one is very sensitive, and I suggest only giving this to your top level administrators. The reason for that is because with a admin that has password admin privileges, if I go to this viewpoints menu and I have this option of the password list. This only appears for password admins. From the password list, I can display every password and I can export to a text file. So, or a CSV file. So from a security standard, you do not want to necessarily hand this out. For regular help desk types, they have no reason to see every single password on one screen. So that's just one you want to hand out cautiously. Let's see, back to users, back to the access tab. Okay, and then these, aside from the mobile app, which is nice, we have this on iOS and Android. These options you can read about in the KB. They're not terribly important. These are basically giving admin rights to standard users in certain little sections. This section down here is useful if you want to disable entire groupings from users. So, for example, you may want to block knowledge base articles, or you may want to block forms. You can do that here for an individual user. We have a global setting that I will get to shortly, but here is where you would do it on an individual user basis. MFA tab, we kind of mentioned this in the IP access table screen. This is where you select which ones you want them to use. And what it will do is the next time they log in, it will force them to set up Google Authenticator or Portal Authenticator. The Portal Authenticator is built into our mobile app. It functions very similar to Google Authenticator in that it has a several digit code that recycles every so many seconds. So that's a nice option. And then one-time password is where you will log in with your name and with your username and password, and then we will email you a one-time password to authenticate. Security groups tab, this is where you would add users to pre-existing security groups. The groups are defined in the next section that I'm going to get to after users, and I'll show you guys how to create security groups in there. One other thing that's of interest in this section are another one called read-only company users. These are users that do not require an additional license in order for you to use them. So long as they're configured like this, where add, edit, and delete are not on, and they are a type of user called company user, and they're assigned to a single company, it will not require an additional license. So this is useful for providing your clients with read-only access to their information stored in the portal. It's particularly useful when you're if you're pitching to a client that you want to do a network discovery as part of the onboarding process, and they may not understand what that means or what they're getting out of it. By creating a read-only company user, you can tell them that they will get something out of it and that you're going to give them access to the data. And also with the portal export tool, you can log in as a read-only company user and extract one company's worth of data, put it on a USB drive, and hand it to the customer in the event that they decide to go with another company, or you stop doing business together for any reason. I find that can be a very persuasive tool when you're trying to pitch network discovery or an audit of their setup, because you will be creating the documentation, providing access to the documentation, and allowing them to keep the documentation later on. So moving on a little more through users, that basically covers users. Security groups, this is a pretty simple section. It's just where you define them. You do add and the name, and you select the users you want to add to the group and save. Very simple section. Okay, API key. This is for enterprise users like yourself. You have access to the open API. It will allow you to, if you take the time to work with it, you can do a lot of automation and scripting. Looking at the KB article here, this will let you know how to get to the API information. So I'm going to display that real quick. So it's basically your portal address with this at the end of it. So we're going to go to generate API key to get a key. So I'm going to do that now. And now we'll copy a key to my clipboard. All right, and then duplicate this. Go to this URL. Let me get my key and click continue. And then it's going to bring you to the real documentation of how all these functions work. So, fetching a list of companies and all of the different data you can put into the portal or pull out of it if you need to. Very interesting if you guys are interested in that open API. Okay, so moving on to this section, site settings, site options. This is I'm sorry. This is where a lot of our little toggles and switches are going to be located. A lot of this you could ignore and not really make any changes to, but this is a section I recommend you come and look at later because we have a lot of little things in here that were feature requests that clients had made, but certain feature requests are very good for that company or some companies, but they may not fit for everybody. So some of those feature requests ended up in here. One I like to use as an example is this one, to hide out of service objects. Let me show you how this works. So if we have servers and we go to, let's see, we have these sliders here. So I'm going to mark this out of service. It's going to say, tell me why. So I'll say decommissioned, save the changes. And so now it displays a little different. I've got a pink background. And if I access it for some reason, like through search or whatever, I'm going to get a notice saying it is decommissioned. So letting me know this is not an active server that I should be working on. So the reason for that little option was we had one client who said, I archive everything that comes through these companies, so I don't want to delete anything, but at the same time I don't want to see those things I'm marked out of service or out. I don't want to see them in the listing every time I'm looking at the company. So that is where that little tool comes in. It allows you to hide out of service objects in the portal. So that's one of many little options we have in here, but that one in particular I like. Okay, so moving along. Forms I'll come back to in a moment. Branding, this is where you set up and modify your logos and your personal branding. Templates are really important. I'm going to come back to that shortly. Templates are very similar to forms in a certain way. Integrations, this is where you would set up your integration with, I see from the notes you guys have Kaseya and ConnectWise. So this is where you would go through and set those up in the portal. Again, this is another time we would go to the KB. They have good articles on how to go through the process of setting these up. Additionally, one thing I like to show in this section is draw.io. This is an integration in a way, but it does not cost you any additional funds. Draw.io or diagrams.net is a place where you can create free diagrams. So like a network diagram or a floor diagram that you want to create, you can create those there, and then following the steps in this KB article, you can move the diagram into a portal object and view it in the portal. And these buttons all work, so you can zoom in, zoom out, etc. It's a pretty nice little tool that you can use with the portal. Okay, links. This is a simple little function that we added. It allows you to create bookmarks that show up right here. So if you have some in particular that you want to put there, that's what that's for. Similar to that are critical objects. Critical objects are defined on two levels, the global level and the company level. So right now at the global level, we have these. This is where you put your most important companies, your most important servers, your critical stuff that you go to on a regular basis. So now we'll go down to the company level, and this is going to change to the company's critical objects. So defining the critical objects are right here, where you can edit, allow editing, and then you press plus button to add. And you can add more and delete, modify, etc. In order to toggle that on, this little widget here, oh, nope, I'm sorry, that one seems to be broken. This widget here, this is where you toggle these things on the global dashboard. So you can see, like critical objects, for example. So now I have my critical object menu. So I can add more, delete, whatever I need to do there with critical objects. So that gives you this drop down. This was the links drop down I showed you. This one is recent searches. So that can be very useful. This is the add button. This button brings you back to version 3 if you need to switch interfaces for any reason. Admin settings. Okay, scoreboard. The scoreboard is it's a way to get quick metrics on an individual company as to how well documented it is. If we go to handover management and we click the scoreboard tab, we can see that we have a score. We have 66 items. We have 10 points out of a possible 22 and a completion rate. So each of these is a different object it's looking for in the portal. Green light indicates that you have accomplished what you need to with that. Red indicates that it has not been done yet. If you have a situation like phone vendor, for example, for a lot of MSPs, they'll do the VoIP phones themselves, so they may be the phone vendor. So in that case, if you still keep phone vendor in your scoreboard, you could click here to mark it not applicable, and it would no longer count against your score. Now, to see how this works in practical terms, it's best to look at it in the site settings and the admin settings. The best way to understand these is to edit one. So we'll look at this one, for example. It's pretty simple. So the way it works is through a filter. So it's looking for a certain object. So what kind of object we see? It's looking for a device object. How is it filtering? It's filtering by the type. How is it comparing? It's doing equals to. So equals to firewall. So it's looking for a device type called firewall in basics. So this goes back to what we looked at shortly ago, where we were looking at groups and types and device types. So what it's asking is it's doing a query on that individual company. It's saying, is there a firewall present at that company? If so, I'll give you a green light. If not, you have a red light. You need to create one. Okay, file repositories. This, I would refer to the KB on this one. This allows you to basically map a network drive to your web interface. So if you wanted to have downloadable ISOs and printer drivers or whatever for your technicians, you could create a mapped folder through file repositories and access that way. Configuration import kind of piggybacks on file repositories, basically through using a tool like KiwiCat tools. You could bring secure FTP, or through secure FTP, you could bring configurations into the file repository, and then with configuration import, you can set it so that it automatically updates the configurations on firewalls and other network devices like that that have been imported through there. Again, that is kind of a complicated topic, so I would recommend the knowledge base on that one for configuration import and file repositories. SMTP and notifications. This is where you plug in your mail server. Once you've plugged in your mail server and done a test to make sure it works, you can start to add some notifications. So we have login failures, login success, and expiring items. Now, the most common expiring item you're probably thinking of would be like a device that's going out or a SSL certificate. And in those cases, expire kind of means to replace or fix completely. But one way that we use expirations in our internal portal is with the knowledge base. The knowledge base is a version of the IT portal. And what we do is when we update a KB article, we set the expiration date to 6 months forward of today, so that we get a trickle of emails letting us know that in 30 days this KB article will expire. It's time to review it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's done. It just means to go review the data, make sure that it all makes sense still, make sure it's still relevant, and then bump it forward another 6 months. So that's one way you can use it as well, like expiring documents. That's another one where you could review, say, an SLA agreement once a year or something of that nature. Licensing and updates. This is where you're going to update the portal. As an on-prem user, it is not automatically going to update for you. So what you're going to do is come to this section, go to the updates tab, and check for updates. I don't have this set up because it's just a demo. But in the case of an on-prem, when you check for updates, it's going to show you if there is an update available. Currently, we do an update typically released every Friday morning. You can toggle this on, and this will give you a notification across the screen as an admin, letting you know that there is an update available. But anyway, just the important part is that for on-prems, it does not automatically update you. So just that's something you want to check in on if you want to turn on the notification or set a weekly reminder to check, because we are aggressively developing and fixing things all the time. Okay, let's see. Subscription and billing. This would be your billing info and where you can make changes to your credit card, that sort of thing. That essentially covers the admin settings. A few other things I'd like to show. Oh, actually, I skipped over a couple. Templates. Templates are very important in the portal. So let's look at templates. Good example of a template, or actually, let's look at our device listing again. So the device listing, like I say, I have a lot of devices, and they're all very different devices. As such, the forms where you create devices, they have to be broad enough to cover a wide range, but they can't be overly specific to cover very niche types of items. Otherwise, there would be so many pages on the form, it would be just unwieldy. So templates come into play when you're using something that has some niche settings and niche fields that you want to store. So a good example of this is a firewall. Firewall has some specific information, and so with templates, we're able to create a custom tab with custom fields to store data. So if we edit this firewall and go to the firewall tab, this is a template that we created. It's got a unlimited text box where you can drop the custom filters and rules, a backup configuration, and a firmware. These are for uploading files, so you can have files stored in the portal like that. This is a last updated for the person that's keeping this documentation. Put some commentary there and save it. The way this looks in the back end when you're creating it, under admin settings, templates. If you go to firewall, and we're going to click this middle icon to edit, the first tab in your templates is going to be very basic, the name and description, and a couple optional toggles. The way these are built, and they're built the same way as forms, it's sections, and in those sections you place fields. So the field types that we have, we just saw, a text unlimited, to file upload, a date, time, and another text unlimited for those. Other fields that we offer for templates and forms would be, let's see, decimals, integers, hyperlinks to outside websites, passwords, a pull down menu where you predefine the values that they can select from, a portal object, a link to another object in the portal, a limited text to 256 characters, text unlimited we saw, yes, no sliders. Basically it was a checkbox, but now it looks like a slider. Key value, which is like a 2-column table, not dissimilar to a Windows registry, so you can store information that way. And a multi-select checkbox, which is the same concept as the pull-down menu, where you predefine the values that they will be able to select from. Okay. Oh, last thing I wanted to show you was the final tab. this is where you decide where in the portal you want this template to show up. You have a lot of options here as to where you can go. You can apply it to everything, like all contacts or all configurations. You can do specific device types. You can even say I only want it on air conditioning units at Able Manufacturing. And they're stackable. You can go with as many as you want to get the coverage that you want. So it's very flexible there. So that is the basics of templates. Very useful. If you one thing I would say as far as templates is that with something like a firewall, if you don't create a template, then typically the thing that you would think to do would be, okay, I'll just drop that information in the notes editor. And for the most part, people that are trying to get on documentation software are trying to get away from those kinds of habits where they drop things in Word documents or Excel spreadsheets or SharePoint or however. So the little bit of additional time it takes to create a template can save you a lot of frustration down the line, and just prevent you from using the notes editor as kind of a dumping ground for all your data. So templates are very useful. Looking at forms, also a useful tool. One particular good use case scenario would be like a checklist form for a daily check of the backups that you're running, where you're comparing real data that you're looking at versus items in the portal and trying to keep track on a day-to-day basis that you're backing everything up. So in that case, you'd create a form in a similar way that you'd create a template, where we give it a name, daily backup review. We can make it company specific, but we don't have to. We can choose a form type. We'll just do change control for now. I save, I define a section, and then I can start defining fields. So I could do something like this where I say ABC Incorporated server 01, and make the field type a little yes no slider and add it. And then I would have a nice little form where the header would be the company name plus the device, and then I would slide yes or no when I'm filling out a form instance to basically do my daily backup review. From the forms section here in the admin settings, you can click the plus button to add a form instance, or you can add a form instance from the general add menu by going to form instance like so. Some other options like a new hire checklist, a customer satisfaction survey. One client I know, he had one where if you want to put a device on the corporate network, you have to fill out the form. So useful in a lot of ways. Let's see. So that's forms and templates. That is the basics. That's the admin settings. Let's look at viewpoints, because that's one I have not really covered yet. So viewpoints are available at the global level and the company level. We'll look at it from the company level. So we've got this company handover management. The synopsis page you'll be familiar with, because that is the standard one that you're going to see every time when you load a company. But the other viewpoints you can use for a company are the sites view, where you see the various sites that are defined for this company. By default, a standard company will have one site, but you can add more sites. And then you use these sites to break information up. So if I go to corporate campus, for example, I'm only going to see in these listings the devices and facilities, et cetera, that are assigned to this particular site. I can also click this little globe to get a map of the sites. One second. The domain view, when you're adding devices and creating devices, you can define a domain, and then you can view them by clicking the domain listing here. Facilities is a subgrouping of sites where you can create, you see we have the site name here, and then we have a facility at the site. So in this case, we have buildings, suites, you could use rooms, They're totally customizable as to what you want to define as facilities. Cabinets, this is another organizational unit in which you can define your rack cabinets and what devices are in them. And then on the individual rack cabinets themselves, you can assign them to a site and a facility, or just a site if you want. Let's see. IP networks, if you have IP networks defined and created, you can look at them here. If we pull one up, let's see one that has some devices on it, network LAN. So I get my basic information here on the main tab, and then I can look here and I can see the devices listing. Okay, and viewpoints. We looked at password list earlier. This only applies if you're a password admin. And then the services. This is where when you create devices, you can list what services they're running. So, for example, you're looking at a company and DNS went down. You can click DNS quickly and get a listing of all servers at that company that have the DNS service defined as running on them. Okay, so that is the basics of admin settings and the interface. One thing I'd like to show you as well is some of the ways we bring data into the portal. You're going to bring some through your integrations, but there's going to be some other ways you can bring data in. So if we go to the import option for devices, for example, we have quite a few options here for devices. We have an Active Directory script that you basically run on the domain controller. So long as you have the firewalls configured correctly, and then you have the user account running the script has admin permissions over all the devices you're trying to collect from, then this works very well. Again, I would reference the knowledge base to read about the Active Directory import for more details on how that works and how to get it set up properly. The RMM and GPO, this is one that is similar, but it works a little bit differently. The RMM script, you can use this for example, for an RMM tool that may not bring data into the portal. You don't have a problem with that with having Kaseya. That should bring data into the portal with the way that it's configured and the way the integration works. But say, for example, you did not have an RMM tool. This would be particularly helpful to bring data in. You can also deploy this through group policy objects. You could create a script that runs when they start up the machine, and it would report back and update information in the portal. Let me see. There is a KB article I can show you that will show you the difference of what these bring in. Yes, this one here. So this is a device that was created, and then we're running an update script on it. And so this is the before and this is the after. So it brings in a lot of information, autofills it, and then the WMI tab brings in a lot of information as well, so you can get kind of a snapshot of what's going on the machine. So you can definitely use this with your integration to bring in even more information, even more data into the portal. Is to use this little GPO or RMM agent. We also have the RMM agent for Macs and Linux. And we also have file import. File import is going to be the common one that you're going to see for all different imports. This is what it looks like. Oops. One second. Okay, so it's basically just a lot of columns. We give you a couple of samples to start with. The required fields are company site, device type, and host name. The rest you could leave blank and import. Some clients love to use these spreadsheets to update the portal. I know of one client, he does a lot of updating of the spreadsheet, and then he just imports the spreadsheet again to keep all his data up to date. This can be another method of inputting data into the portal rather than manually updating in the user interface. So that's just something to bear in mind. So that is device imports. Let's see. Some other imports we have import methods for just about all of these. Let's see. Yep, we have imports for all of them. So yeah, you can import all of these things into the portal one way or another through Excel spreadsheets and similar. One thing I did not cover yet are relationships. Um, this is another important part of the portal. It's great to have a lot of data, but if you don't know how it relates to other parts of data, it's less useful. So I have this contact in the portal that I use as an example for relationships. So I have the relationships tab. I'm going to look here, and I have him related out to two objects in the portal: one agreement, one device. The agreement is an Adobe Acrobat license that we have stored. And when you create a relationship to something else, there's a description field. So as an example, I use the license key for the description field. So if I click on it, I'm able to see basically some fake license keys that we dropped in here, some assigned and unassigned. And then I have some relationships, and this is where I've defined the users that are using these license keys. So I can click on any of these users to go to them, but I'll go back to Fletcher. And we'll go back to relationships tab, and we'll look at this accounting printer because he is an accountant in the fake company. So I created a fake printer that they all use. So this would be an example of like a multifunction printer that is the main office printer rather than a spread of individual printers. So we have the basic data about the printer, and then the relationships tab where you see Fletcher and you see his co-workers in the accounting department, and who all is using this particular printer. Lastly, I would say the other one similar to relationships, but these are absolutely exclusive, are assigned devices. This allows you to in this use case scenario, I've used the assigned devices for this. I've assigned devices to the user. I've given him a computer, I've given him an iPhone and an iPad to use. So if your RMM tool is telling you that PC85 is having some kind of trouble and you need to know who's the user, with a relationship, his name will appear right there on the main tab as the assigned contact. Let's see. So last little bits in the My Portal section. These are some options you have. My password list is a personal password list, and my document list is a personal document repository. My settings are some options that you have, personal options, and my contact info is editing your contact object in the portal. Admin settings we went through. IT portal knowledge base brings you to the knowledge base that we referenced a few times. Hide help, hide some of the help prompts that are in the portal. Display settings, this is pretty neat. This allows you to toggle different types of views depending on your preference. Personally, I kind of like, I'm not sure, I don't play with it too much, but I kind of like the dark mode. It's a little easier on my eyes. But the light mode is what I kind of use on a regular basis. Completely up to you how you want to set that up. Okay, and then time tracker. This is something you can use optionally. It's a little time tracking tool. You can add an issue and just track your time. You could say that for handover, working on issue with server 01, and I'll pick which user is doing it, what's going on with it, create issue, and I can toggle on to toggle time and such. It's a pretty neat little tool that you can take a look at. And yes, that would be the basic overview of the portal. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.